So what does the market want? Well, critically, the first thing is fit for purpose, all right? Spent a fair bit of time talking to a number of purchasers who want large volumes of carbon credits. They want the Keogh CFI credits, all right? They want to be able to offset their tax liability. That's what they're after. They want to know about the price. Everyone here hears about the $23 a tonne starting price. Landholders aren't going to get that, all right? There are transaction costs, there are risks, there are other issues about getting carbon off farmers. One of the reasons for that is the $23 a tonne, they can write a cheque and be done with it. Their obligation is gone. It takes them a very short period of time. When they start coming to deal with landholders, they have to start employing lawyers to deal with the contracts. They have to start looking at the delivery risk. They have to have someone employed, just simply, to actually go through the process of working out what is a compliance certificate and not. You'd be surprised how far behind some companies are in dealing with their carbon liability. Many of them are so busy digging stuff up and selling it that they seem to forget about what's going on. Importantly, you need to tell the story, all right? What is the environmental, social and economic co-benefits? The government's very strong on this. Part of the reason of all this carbon farming initiative is to try and drive natural resource management through private investment. Right, we can get these companies to be actually undertaking activities within the agricultural and resource management sector to improve the outcome for everybody. The other one is parcel sizes, okay? They want large volumes. The smallest parcel we get asked for now is 10,000 tonnes. No one in this room is going to be able to produce 10,000 tonnes unless there's maybe a piggery or a big dairy in here. But they want very large large volumes. And they don't want 400 or 500 contracts with landholders. They want 1 or 2 contracts with large deliverers. So this is where the business models about carbon pool managers and aggregators come into it. They want low risk. They're more likely to pay for issued and verified credits than to invest in someone who's going to go out and plant trees that they don't know that it's going to come. Where is the delivery? How do I know you have the capacity to do this? And unfortunately at the moment they want things in very short-term cycles. Make no mistake that this talk about reducing the clean energy future or getting rid of the carbon tax is having a major ramification on our carbon markets. And the reason is a company does not want to come and give me $2 million to go and plant trees that they might not need in 2 years' time. All right, so they want these things paid back fairly quickly, which is really tough because the landholder's going to plant something that's going to be there for 100 years while the purchaser's saying, well, I'll buy the first year or two's worth. And that's it. You know, some of the contracts we've seen are out to 5 years, but it's pretty tough, really. This is an estimated long-term market curve, and it's been generated from some Treasury figures based on what they expect the starting price to be and where they finish the end price in 2030. Now, there's no way a market-based instrument is going to be that smooth in its price curve. You know, there's just not a hope in hell. It's going to go up and down over time. And I've seen it in plenty of the voluntary markets, and I've seen it in some of the mandatory markets, even in Europe. You know, in 2005, I think towards the end, 2008, towards the end of the first commitment period or the first phase of the European Emissions Trading Scheme, it got down to €1. Within 3 weeks, it was back up to 35. So being a policy construct and driven by government policy, governments can pull levers and make big dramatic changes. When we did the New South Wales Greenhouse Gas Abatement Scheme, we got accredited with Landcare on I think the 6th of September in 2007 or 8, and that was a Tuesday, and on the Wednesday they announced the closure of the scheme, and the price of carbon went from $20 to $3. You know, we just spent 18 months getting ourselves accredited. And that's the sort of political rhetoric that can actually really affect the prices. I've seen a lot of predictions about the long-term carbon market, and a lot of it depends on what happens in the international community. I mean, we've got a 160 million tonne reduction now, but if there's a significant movement on the international community, it could go up to 25%. And the Labor Party has an aspirational target of reducing emissions below 2000 levels by 80% by 2050. The only thing I can really tell you about carbon market prices or estimated long-term carbon market prices is that they're wrong. All right? They're not going to be there. I've seen analysis from one company that was written for Australia that gave the European Union Emissions Trading Scheme price out to 2020 at €3. They'd written the same report 6 weeks earlier, a similar report 6 weeks earlier to another group claiming it was going to be between 14 and 18. All right, so this is the issue. You don't know what it is, and you don't know where it's going to go, like any other agricultural commodity. There's obviously a number of risks, and we know the Coalition has the blood oath to repeal the carbon clean energy future, but you've got to ask, will they or can they? I don't know of many governments that have reduced or removed taxes in my time. But importantly, the CFI has that bipartisan support. And it doesn't really matter with these risks. Ultimately, what we're talking about is a price risk. Right? That's where it really comes down to. What am I going to get paid for it? And it's going to be that price risk is very real because it's very volatile, and prices vary dramatically. There's also a few on-farm risks that are out there as well. We're talking about undertaking new management practices. There could be new chemicals. There could be new inoculants for methanogens and things, and these will have some risks associated with them, and there'll be some time required to sort those out. Some people will be using new technologies in the measuring and the monitoring of their activities, and there's going to be some issues there. And we have some issues around projects just delivering them. You know, do you have the capacity, the nous, the wherewithal to do it? And of course, climate is also a risk. If the predicted climate change occurs, as they say, and you've planted some trees that are right on the edge of their environmental range, and in 70 years' time they're well outside their range, they're no longer sequestering carbon, they might even be dead, do you have a liability associated with it? And one of the big risks is what is the effect on property prices? And I put this slide in here because lots of people ask me this regularly. And it depends where you are on the sequestration curve. And if you've got the sequestration curve, you can see going up like that. It sequesters fairly slowly at first, then it picks up a little bit and it slows down. Now, if I start selling my property down here, where I've got very little liability, but what I've actually got is a registered, recognised project that is underway, and I've got all this lead time of income to come, you might think that's an asset. And the person who's buying the property might say, well, okay, I've got a bit of income in that. That's good. I'll take it. I'm very happy with it. If you're 35 years down the track, remembering that on a typical sequestration project, around about 65 to 70% of your sequestration occurs in the first 30 odd years. If you get down here though, where you've got all your sequestrations pretty much occurred, you've got all the liability, you've issued the certificates, you've taken all the benefit, and then the next bloke's left with all the liability, then you might not think that's so much of an asset. Just remembering you can purchase out the liability, but it'll depend on that price of carbon, whether it's worth it or not. So how do you actually get into the market? And I can see you're all champing at the bit to get into the market now. But there are a whole heap of different ways to enter the market. All right, and this is just a very short list. And this is the most common, the carbon pool manager. And this is where someone comes to your property and says, what I'll do is I'll plant the trees and I'll undertake the activity and I'll give you a percentage of the return. That might be through a stipend, it might be through leasing the land at market rates, it might be purchasing the land at market rates. But generally what they do is they put a carbon right on the property. All right, and that gives them legal access to the property and legal rights to the actual carbon. And the carbon right separates the carbon from the tree from the land. But you can't take the carbon out of the tree, and I've never seen a tree grow in mid-air. So essentially it does give some sort of vested interest over the land. But if I was coming onto someone's property and planting $2.5 million worth of trees, I'd want some security as well. So I can understand why some people do it. The other thing is, depending on where you are in life, this could be a really good option. And I've advised some farmers to go down this road because they get paid a good wage or a good return on their property for 30 or 40 years, and they don't have to sell the property, and they don't want to move into town, and they don't have to. But the CFI is developed so you can do it yourself. You might need some specialist advice along the way. You can get that from the department, you can get that from consultants. But you'll have more paperwork, but more benefit. But because these 100-year rules, particularly with sequestration, you've got to remember, ultimately, the responsibility to maintain the vegetation lies with the landholder. So even if a carbon pool manager comes and does it and everything's fine, if they go broke, they'll eventually, if the system starts to come back, it'll catch up and it'll come back to the landholder every time. So you can do it yourself. Usually agencies charge a fee for service or take a percentage of the benefit, and they do most of the specialist work like the models and the monitoring and the reporting, so you can get on with farming and they can get on with doing the administrative stuff. The aggregator model, very similar to the carbon pool model, and usually comes with a self-manager and agency, and that's just someone who just basically runs the silo. All right, they're the people who just say, come and tip all your carbon credits in here, we'll run a fee and we'll put them all together, and then we'll sell them in one contract to someone else. You also get some joint venture partners, but that's more along the lines of things like piggeries and dairies, where you've actually got technology that has to go in, plant that has to be built, so that people come in and they give different components of the project requirements. One thing I will stress is you need to seek independent legal advice. All right, you can expect contracts in this game. All right, because again, we're dealing with something that's a little hard to get hold of. But you will need to seek independent legal advice, and there's not a hell of a lot of really good independent legal advice out there. All right, you're going to try to explain to your local solicitor about what you're trying to do, and some of them just look at you like, huh? You're going to what? With who? You need to find that independent legal advice. If you're struggling, you can contact us and we'll put you in touch with a list of people. They charge like wounded bulls because there is a fair bit of scarcity, but certainly get your independent legal advice because some of these contracts are very long term. So that's sort of the dollars you're looking at. You know, you might get $120, $240 a hectare after costs per year. You know, and this is the decision land managers make. Is it a good land use? And this is what I'm trying to get towards here is gross margins, particularly with mixed species environmental plantings. If you're undertaking them, there's not a lot to do once you've actually got it established. Once it's got through that establishment phase, I'm not advocating fence and forget, but there's not that much to do. Forestry plantations are obviously significantly more. Soil carbon we don't see as that much. I've seen heaps of different data on soil carbon. Usually what I see, it comes out to 1 to 2 tonnes per hectare per year as actual credible soil carbon. And because it's non-Keogh, we think it's going to be somewhere between $7 and $15 a tonne maximum. All right, it probably would be substantially less. Unfortunately, in 9 years of trading carbon, I've never sold 1 tonne of soil carbon. It's because of the difficulty in accounting it, because all the different soil types, all the different management regimes, etc. And enteric fermentation, it could be up to $5 to $10 per animal per year for cows. So it varies dramatically. And how these things come together is going to be really interesting. Because when you start looking at how you actually enter the market and how do I actually gather the carbon credits, it might not be a physical carbon credit to you. It might be that the fertiliser company is selling a cheaper product to you and running the carbon sequestration or the carbon abatement program themselves. Because you need economies of scale. There is a fair bit of paperwork and administration involved. All right, and there's been some research out of South Australia. You can plant at least 10% of your property out to trees and have no impact on your income. And it's probably a hell of a lot more than that, but we know there's no impact on your property at around 10%. Because if you're slowing down the wind speed and you're keeping the moisture in your soil, your sheep and cattle are more efficient because they're in their shade and they're converting food to feed and to fibre and food rather than sweating, then you're in a much better position. So it's carbon and farming, not carbon or farming.